Paws of Fury: The Legend of Hank is quite the movie. On the surface, it may look like a generic kids movie, but behind the scenes, there's actually a lot more to it. This is actually a film that has struggled to see the light of day for years, and that dates way before the pandemic. It was supposed to come out back in summer 2017 with distribution by Open Road Films, but then the road got destroyed and it was no longer open. So with that distributor gone, who picked up the film for release? Nobody. As far as I know, this film has just been collecting dust for years with no one else to put it out into the world. I was actually aware of this film's existence when it was scheduled for 2017, thanks to Animat.
Good chance that it could be funny.
And when it didn't appear in theaters that summer, I figured it had just gone direct to video. And by the time I realized the film wasn't even out, it was a long time after that summer. At that point, I figured the film was just never gonna come out at all, but I was wrong. In early 2022, Paramount scooped up the rights of the film, they changed the name of it, and they eventually put it out in theaters. And also, apparently, they labeled it as a Nickelodeon movie. It's weird seeing that logo in front of a movie Nickelodeon had literally no involvement with. So with all this information in mind, there are some major warning signs going up. More often than not, movies with complicated production histories are terrible. If this film took a whopping 5 years to get picked up by somebody, then it's unlikely that it would be some sort of masterpiece. And everyone became even more doubtful that this film would be good when the trailers showed up, which were, not good. The marketing for Paws of Fury made it look like a really dumb kids movie and didn't show much promise. Also, Paramount is really good at releasing terrible animated movies, so that didn't help matters. It's kind of strange they were the ones to pick this up though, because Netflix and Lionsgate are usually the ones who go after the low-hanging fruit of animated films. This definitely looked like the film that would be picked on by every animation critic and be number one on all the worst lists. And I won't deny things weren't looking too great considering its history and marketing, but after seeing the film, it's honestly not too bad. No, I'm being serious. This film is kind of good. Maybe I wouldn't call it amazing, but it definitely does not belong in the same category as Norm of the North, the Emoji Movie, Earwig, and, whatever this is. For what it was, I did enjoy this film. For what looked to be a generic kids movie, it actually turned out to be pretty well executed. Granted, we have seen this type of story many times before, as I discussed when I talked about Boy and the Beast. But similar to that movie, I think the thing that elevates Paws of Fury are the two main characters. As generic and surface level as their dynamic may be, I gotta say they are both enjoyable characters. Hank is a good lighthearted protagonist, and Jimbo is an entertaining mentor character. It's fun to see these two train together, and it's really satisfying when Hank eventually gets better as a samurai. I think they have a very natural and sweet bond, and the voice acting definitely helps with this. Michael Cera is pretty decent as Hank, and he honestly fits this type of character really well. And Samuel L. Jackson's performance is really good, making Jimbo's jokes more effective. That's another thing, I thought the humor in this movie was funny, clever even. Of course, you still got your dumb fart jokes and plot points revolving around a giant toilet, which I'll get to later. But other than that, I think the jokes are pretty well written and delivered. The comedic timing is spot on, and even if the performances for most of the side characters aren't really great, they bring just enough energy to the jokes. Even the meta humor worked out quite well for me. And that's surprising for a movie like this because that type of humor is usually very hit or miss with me. When it's well implemented, it can be really clever and funny, but when it's used incorrectly, it can be really annoying. And thankfully, Paws of Fury fits into the former category because the meta humor isn't overused and it actually fits in quite well considering what type of movie this is. You see, this film was made to be a parody of sorts of a Mel Brooks movie from the 70s. And I feel that all the fourth wall breaking just adds to the parody angle this movie is going for. So when you go into a movie expecting it to be generic fluff, jokes like that do catch you off guard and give you quite a few chuckles. They even snuck in a few pop culture references that I thought were kind of funny, particularly a joke about Mamma Mia and Mentos. Another surprisingly good thing about this movie is the animation, which does look pretty nice. I'll admit the rendering is off in a few places and the character animation isn't quite as smooth as it should have been. And plus, some of the character designs are not that great, like Hank himself. He just looks like a generic dog from any other animated movie, and nothing about his personality is shown through his design. And it's really weird when he gets close up to the screen like, ew, get away. But for as low a budget as this had, I gotta admit, it does look pretty good. I like the character designs of the cats, the backgrounds are nice, and some of the action scenes do look neat. Much like a lot of other movies with lower budgets, this film probably would have looked better if it had been animated traditionally. But for what it is, this film does have some pretty decent visuals. So yeah, as generic as it may be, there are quite a few things to like about Paws of Fury. But I wouldn't claim it's a perfect movie, with most of the problems being apparent in the second half. Just like Boy and the Beast, that's ironic. After about 50 minutes, the film resorts to using tired tropes and doesn't execute them well either. Of course, we have the infamous poopy trope, but we also have Hank becoming obsessed with himself and thinking he is the greatest hero of all time. After Hank wins one battle, the villain invites him to a party so he can destroy the town when Hank's not looking. This is reminding me of another animated movie. I just can't put my finger on it. Oh, and the villain. He's alright. Ricky What's-His-Face doesn't give a great performance, and he's not really all that threatening. But on the other hand, I do really like petty villains who are evil for the most shallow reasons, so he's fine. And even if they did resort to dumb tropes, I thought this can lead to a satisfying climax where Hank takes him down. But to my surprise, this movie doesn't really have a climax. It has 4. Yeah, there are 4 separate climaxes in this movie, taking up the last 30 minutes. First, we have Hank and Jimbo breaking into the villain's evil lair to save this big orange cat. Then we have the Avengers Endgame-esque climax where the entire cat town fights against a giant army. Then we have Hank fighting the villain on a giant green toilet, which is honestly the best of the 4 climaxes. It's surprisingly awesome. And then finally, everyone tries to dig a giant moat around the town to stop a giant flood, but by that point, my interest was really starting to wane. I wouldn't call the third act of the movie boring per se, because there's still some good jokes and awesome fight scenes, but it's kind of ridiculous how they were trying to drag this movie out as much as possible. Eventually, it starts to get really repetitive, like there's 2 scenes where Hank gives a giant speech to inspire the town, and they only needed 1. So the climax isn't perfect, and my engagement with the story definitely decreased as time went on, but for what it was, I still thought this was a satisfying movie. Yeah, I'm being 100% serious. I like Paws of Fury: The Legend of Hank. I'm not gonna call it some sort of life-changing masterpiece, but for what it is, it's an enjoyable movie. Good animation, good main characters, good jokes, and not to mention a pretty awesome soundtrack. I'm not ashamed to admit that I had a good time watching this in the theater, so much so that I went to see it twice. If the trailers look interesting to you, then you'll probably enjoy it as well. I don't even think more casual moviegoers will mind it either. I'm not exactly the nicest critic out there, and I will admit this film isn't short of flaws, but for what it is, I like it. Hank will always be legendary in my book. I'm going to give Paws of Fury: The Legend of Hank a 7 out of 10. Super happy this film turned out to be good, and even happier that the people who worked on it finally got to release it. Shout out to the crew of this movie for sticking it through and finally getting their movie out. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed, comment down below, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time. Is there anything about the movie I forgot to discuss? Oh.